Alrighty, good evening, everybody. I am Caitlin Cahill. I'm the Zoning and Animal Control Manager for Arapahoe County. Thank you for coming. So we actually had regulation changes recently within unincorporated Arapahoe County. The county commissioners voted and approved regulations for allowing urban chicken and beekeeping. We followed that up with this presentation and workshop, so that way we could ensure that everyone had access to the best and proper care and maintenance of bee and chicken keeping. So that way you can respect the neighborhood and make sure that you have all your answers for the needs that you have to start this hobby if you haven't started already. So a couple things. We are specific to only unincorporated Arapahoe County. So I just want to let everybody know, if you're unsure if you live within a city or if you live within unincorporated Arapahoe County, we have a couple people from Zoning and Animal Control over here that have laptops. They would be happy during breaks to look your address up for you and let you know if you live in a city with different regulations. We also have some materials along the back, and then we have the new regulations that have been approved for the unincorporated citizens specifically. So when we're going to be doing the presentations here this evening, those presentations are pretty much just general to anybody who wants to keep backyard chickens or backyard bees, but when you get to the regulations specifically, that's when it varies by jurisdiction. So we want to make sure you're getting the most accurate information for your area. We have Jonathan Braybeck. He's going to be our chicken expert for the evening. And then we have Lisa Mason, and she's going to talk to everybody about beekeeping. They are both from CSU Extension, and we are very excited to have them here tonight. So thank you both. Additionally, we do have a live recording going for people who couldn't be here tonight. We really wanted to make sure we had this saved. So if anybody is at home watching, or if anybody you know wants to watch it after the fact, it is on our website. There's a link to the YouTube video, and then I've uploaded the PowerPoint presentations to look through as well. So if you need a link to that, feel free to email zoning@arapahogov.com, and we can forward that link to you. The mics are sitting around. If you have a question, just make sure to go ahead and grab the mic so we can get it on the recording and so anybody at home can hear, and then make sure it's green at the bottom instead of red when you ask. And let's see, bathrooms are right out this door, and then there's also some water fountains, and there's water in the back here by the materials. Do we have any questions? Awesome, Jonathan. Thank you, guys.
See if I can do this without having to move around too terribly much. Start off with, you have my entire PowerPoint presentation, which has some other information in it in the beginning of it. We're going to skip ahead to actually slide, I believe it's slide 11 that we're going to skip ahead to, because the other stuff is just, like I said, some background information that would be part of a larger presentation. I just wanted to share it with you tonight so you had it to take home with you. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Okay, so in terms of which chickens you choose to have in your backyard, that's really a matter of personal preference. So we're not going to dwell on that very much. If there's questions that you have about various breeds, we can talk about those things. But mostly you just want to find something that suits your needs. Maybe you're interested in having a variety of colored eggs, and so you'll pick your chickens based on that, or maybe you like smaller breeds versus larger breeds. One consideration that you definitely want to take into account is how they deal with cold and inclement weather, and so that would be one thing that I would make you aware of, and just to usually check on that. But usually the big scheme of things, in general, our winters aren't so bad that you can't manage your birds through the short periods of time that we have bad weather. So there's no difference in terms of the quality of the eggs or anything like that from one breed to another. They're all the same, whether they're green eggs or brown eggs or white eggs. They're all the same. So that's going to be at your discretion as to which breeds you choose. Some basics of chick care. So when you bring your chickens home, you want to find a draft-free place. Have a brooder, which can be just a Rubbermaid tub for that matter. Put some shavings in there so they don't slip around. And then you want to have a heat source or a light, and then make sure that they have food or water continually while they're in that brooder and while they're maturing. Next, like I said, the large cardboard box can work as that brooder or Rubbermaid tub. You can increase the size as needed depending on how many chicks you have in there. If you go to the local feed stores, oftentimes they'll use like stock tanks and things like that, but it depends on whether you want to keep those kinds of things in your garage or if you have space for that. But when there are chicks, you're not keeping them outside yet. They're indoors someplace. Again, kind of a draft-free place. You do need to keep something on the floor of that so that they don't slip, because they can damage their legs when they're young. And then you want to change those shavings when they're wet or soiled, because they're going to be in that brooder for a little while. The light source is their heat. If they're huddled underneath the light source, they're too cold. You can get other things that are specifically made for that as well, but most people would just use a heat lamp. Obviously, if they're all spread out, they're too hot or against the edges. But that temperature needs to be around 95 degrees, and then you reduce that temperature gradually so they can acclimate to being outside. Obviously, that clean, fresh water, and they will fill that little round dish down there with wood shavings shortly after you put it in there. So you'll find yourself changing that, probably morning and night. And you can elevate that as the chicks grow. They'll like that better. Same thing with their feed. Any good basic chick starter for the first few weeks. Then after that, you switch them over to the chick grower for 5 to 6 months, and then you switch to the layer pellets or the layer crumbles. Notice I didn't say anything in there about chicken scratch. Chicken scratch, don't confuse that with the layer feed. Chicken scratch is like corn and other grains that they mix together, and you would just kind of throw out for them. That's considered a treat. And kind of is an energy for them. And so you might give that more during the wintertime and just throw a handful out for them, or place a little bit of that mixed in with their regular feed as a treat for them. But you don't want that to be their continual source or their main source for nutrition. So you do want to use those layer pellets because they're formulated to give them the level of nutrition they need when they're laying. Grit would be something that they eat. I forget what exactly the grit is, but if you don't provide some of that, they'll figure that out on their own, and they'll start pecking at rocks and things, because that goes inside of their gizzard to work as a part of their digestion to help them crush the food that they're eating, because they don't have teeth like we do. So it goes into their gizzard, and then it helps process the food. Other things that you'll see on the market are like oyster shells to help increase the calcium in their diet, and that may be something you want to consider. But that's the basics of some of the feed. I've got a handout back there about basic feeding your backyard flock. I missed one slide. I thought I got all of them. I changed the format like yesterday evening, and I don't know why I did, and it changed all my font to yellow, and I thought I got all my slides changed, and I guess I missed one. Hopefully you can see this okay. I apologize. Basic chick care, that's when you're kind of ready for eggs. and you're putting your coop together, you want to have a nesting, what's considered a nesting box. So that's one nesting box for 4 hens. Obviously, you put some bedding in there to protect the eggs, and then that source of calcium, that's what I was talking about in terms of that oyster shell and things like that. That will also help prevent them from deciding to peck at the eggshells. But those are the nesting boxes right there. So caring for the eggs, and I have a handout also on home-produced egg production back there about caring for them, how you clean them and things like that, because you don't want to just wash them underneath the sink because the eggshell is porous, and there is beneficial bacteria on the outside of that. So cleaning them is something you want to notice how it says clean dirt off eggs with sandpaper or a cloth. So it's very lightly kind of pick that off of there if there's any soil on it. If washed, use warm water. They have some solutions out there for you to do that with that they sell on the market, but really you don't need to buy anything like that. You can have eggs stored in the fridge, can have a shelf life greater than 3 weeks. What I have found, you don't actually have to refrigerate fresh chicken eggs. You can keep them on your countertop for a while. And I can't off the top of my head remember what that length of time is. I want to say like a week or so before you need to put them in the refrigerator, and then that refrigerator will extend that life for you. Always make sure that you wash your hands after handling the eggs after you collect them. Like I said, I do have that handout back there about how to care for your home produced eggs. So quickly about poultry housing, like we said, tonight's an overview of a lot of topics. So if you're considering having backyard poultry, you get a good quality start. But the ideal poultry house, if you will, or chicken coop, meets specific needs of its occupants. Like you see them there on a, I'm gagging on the name of it, on a bar. They prefer that where they have a place to roost. That's the word I was looking for. And so having something like that for them is beneficial. You do need to provide clean, draft-free, comfortable environment for them year-round. So they need to get out of the elements if the wind is blowing really bad and things like that. They need a place to go. The floor should be easy to clean and disinfect. Oftentimes that's wood, which is not necessarily easy to disinfect. But you do want to make sure you kind of keep it clean and allow them to get off of that floor with a roost. And that's what that last one there says, is provide a space for them to roost, because that's something they need and provides a good environment for them. Selecting your site, things to consider obviously is that soil drainage, air movement, location of the dwelling, which in some instances is dictated to us by what our regulations are, whether you live in a particular city in Arapahoe County or whether you're in unincorporated Arapahoe County, you need to want to consider that location of where you put that dwelling. One thing as I would suggest is what's nice about that picture there is you notice that it's up off the ground. And what that helps with is helps prevent any rodents from wanting to live underneath your chicken coop, because mice will think that's great because there's bird feed out there all the time. And so having that up like that reduces that from occurring. Likewise, if you have the chicken coop over here where you don't have like a shed or anything like that around it, they won't decide to go hang out in your shed while they're waiting for the chickens to drop feed on the ground. So keep that in mind. Your water supply, obviously we're talking about backyard poultry here. Everybody's got a hose bib usually on the side of the house, and so running a hose over to fill up your water or for you to carry it over is not something that's usually a challenge. And then your expandability, obviously that would be dictated to the number of birds you start out with, and then how that fits within your particular regulations for where you live. The soil drainage is important so you don't have water standing there and mud, and it keeps it from getting a wet litter or dirty eggs, because when they're young they don't necessarily pay attention to where they're laying their eggs. They start to figure that out after a little while, but at first they'll just randomly sometimes lay one. Talks about the high ground so that you can have runoff, but make sure that if there is runoff that you're not causing erosion to occur. So the space requirements, the floor space requirements varies according to the type of project. The age and the size of the birds will change that footage. We have some guidelines that we put out there, and there's part of the regulations is just that. But I do have another handout over there that talks about what some of that square footage is for particular birds. But providing that adequate floor space prevents cannibalism, because birds are omnivores, they're not herbivores, and I think people think that they're herbivores, but they're not. So if they, and also their brains are not very big, so they will peck at anything like that's shiny or anything that may have a flavor. So if one of your birds gets injured in some way and there's a little bit of blood, the other birds will want to peck at that, and they'll just keep pecking at it and pecking at it and pecking at it, and then it causes it to get worse. And there's products out there that you can put on them if that starts to occur. But that's why we talk about cannibalism, is giving them adequate space prevents them from wanting to do that kind of thing. Allows them to grow appropriately, and it increases your egg production and reduces morbidity and mortality. So keep that in mind whenever you're selecting the type of coop that you get. The more space you're able to provide them, the better off they're going to be, the more happy they're going to be. Additional space should be provided for storage of feed supplies and equipment, so you're not keeping that stuff in the same place. That's why you've got your garden shed or someplace else to keep that. I highly suggest, if you're going to go buy like a 50-pound bag of feed, that you keep that in some sort of solid container so that it doesn't attract other critters. That's the same thing if you have bird seed that you're going to keep in your backyard because you have bird feeders for wild birds and things. You want to keep that in a solid container as well, because you don't want other things wanting to get in there. Installation for the housing, I can tell you, I have a picture at the end of this of my personal coop that I built, and I'm not very handy at all. But I don't have any insulation on that. They do fine, or did fine during the winter. I don't currently own any backyard birds right now. But what's important is really to protect them from that wind. But if you're able to insulate it in some way, that's great. Think about that when you go to buy one in terms of the thickness of the wood that it's made out, and those kind of things will help with that. But usually a heat lamp will keep it plenty warm for them. But you will see, partially due to the cold temperatures, but partially due to the decreased light that goes along with that time of year, some decrease in egg production. One of the things we talk about is if their combs and wattles get frozen, some of the things you can do for that. I've actually not really had that occur. But you can put some Vaseline on there if you think if it's going to be a really cold night and you're able to catch your birds. Put some Vaseline on their wattles and combs. It'll help prevent them from getting any kind of frostbites to those. The one thing though is they'll want to eat more and produce less during those cold months because they'll want to eat to keep them warm, and that's where that scratch comes in handy, because that's a higher energy kind of feed, like a candy, if you will, for them. But again, that wind is really what's most important there, to keep them, be able to get them out of the wind. Likewise, you want them to be able to get out of sunlight too, if it's real hot and direct sunlight on their coop. And like I said, you'll see here in a minute about that. So light is an important factor for maturation of the laying and the breeding birds. Light can control when the birds come into production and when they go into molt. So they need longer days in order to lay eggs, and when they feel the days getting shorter, that's when that'll send them into molting. So if you control that light, you can keep them producing for longer periods of time before they go into molt. But it can be natural or artificial. Obviously, in the summertime, you have adequate lighting usually. Going into the fall and winter, providing light will play a role in that. You'll need to do that partially for their heat. But the duration or day length is important. Again, increasing hours of daylight simulates springtime and causes maturation of the reproductive tract, which will send them into. So if you get birds in the fall, the reason why that slides in there, if you buy your chicks in the fall, you'll need to do that to get them to start laying eggs sooner rather than waiting longer, because it'll take them longer to mature. Decreasing will send them into that molt where they shed their feathers and grow new ones, and during that time they aren't laying eggs. So you don't want to expose adolescent birds to increasing hours of light unless you're ready for them to start into egg production. And then your laying hens, you don't want them to experience the decreasing hours of light because it'll send them into molt. Laying hens are typically maintained at 15 to 16 hours of daylight per day, so you can do that without having to burn a heat lamp 24 hours or anything like that. Oftentimes, what I did was I just put it on a timer in my backyard and plugged it into the side of my house. So a couple of things, and I've got a whole handout over there also on backyard biosecurity. Keeping your birds disease-free is really important. Restrict your property to other animals and birds. Thanks. Yeah, I need that. That will really help things out if you can kind of decrease that from other critters getting in there. Keep things clean. Keep the food up off the ground and the water clean. Don't bring disease home. In other words, separate birds that have been moved from one person's place to another place. So if you're getting your birds from somebody else, if you get into this kind of thing, they have these bird swaps and stuff like that. I caution you at doing that just because unless you know what you're looking for, you can always be bringing somebody else's problem home to your place. And so just be aware. And that is a way to increase your chances of bringing disease into your flock. But know some of the warning signs. They're kind of outlined there. And I've got another handout over there of common poultry diseases and things. Any kind of sick birds that you're not sure about, contact your local veterinarian or the extension office. We're not really into diagnosing anything, but we can help direct you to people who do. And I walked through my office before I came over here, which is this catty corner here. And maybe when I'm done here tonight, and Lisa's talking, I'd run over there. I've got some cards. It's got that USDA hotline on there. When I was proofreading this thing, it only had part of the phone number, and so I've got some cards over there that I can get you that'll have that. Basically, it's calling the state vet's office is what that is. Some signs of illness. Like I said, there's a whole handout I have over there on signs of illness. We could talk a lot about that, but that's not the purpose of tonight's talk. It's just to make you aware. Here's some resources that I've used just from a personal backyard poultry enthusiast myself. We have some stuff, and I copied our website also as a handout that's got both the bee links that we have for educational material as well as the poultry one or chicken links that we have, because a lot of those links go to some webinars and some YouTube videos that are very good. That's put out by some other extension universities as well. So this is, like I said, the picture of my coop. It's pretty simple. That's my nesting box area right there. This is just one of those dog shades that you'd get for a dog run. And we put it on that side because that's south, actually, at my house. And that gave them the shade they needed from the sun, because I didn't have that originally, and I noticed that they were really hot, not really enjoying their daytimes. And then you can kind of see that was us introducing some other birds. We had a couple already that were full grown, and these ones were babies, so they were in the little dog crate, and we kind of would let them out so they could get accustomed to one another when we were introducing them to the other birds. Should be one more slide. No, there we go. Do you have any questions? Kind of went through that, I know, really quick, but I was trying to keep it to a half hour, so. Any questions you might have about raising backyard birds? Yes.
What about table scraps? From my dad's generation, they used to throw a bunch of table scraps out there, and the chickens would pick bones clean and that kind of stuff. What about that kind of food? I would caution you on feeding any like meat products to them and stuff like that, but they will eat, like, if they catch a mouse, they'll think that's the greatest thing ever. And if they, like, mealworms and things like that. But I would avoid throwing meat scraps out to them and just wholesale throwing scraps out there. They love it in the summertime. If you throw them your watermelon rinds, they will pick that clean to where there's just a thin strip of watermelon skin there. The other things they like when you carve your pumpkin for Halloween. But be careful about giving them too much of that. This is the voice of experience. We used to be like, oh, great, here you go, and we'd give them a large amount of whatever it was, and they had a ton of fun, but then we got one that got
impacted or compacted croup, which is not a fun procedure to deal with and often is fatal. So you have to be careful about them getting compaction in there because they just gorged themselves on it is what it was. So, yeah, and I think I mentioned, I said gizzard earlier, that grit goes in the croup. I said gizzard, should have been croup. But anyways, so you do need to be cautious of that. They do like some scraps as a treat. That should not be their main source of food because it's, again, that balanced diet. And when you're raising them for egg production, they need to have that correct calcium to phosphorus ratio is important so that they produce those shells correctly. One thing you do need to be aware of, and I thought it was in there, but I didn't see it when I was giving the presentation, you want to make sure that you collect your eggs, like I would do it twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, because if you leave those eggs in there and one of them accidentally steps on an egg and it cracks, or they decide to peck at that egg, they'll get into a habit where somebody will become an egg eater, and you'll be competing with your chickens to get your eggs out in time before they decide to eat their own eggs. And so that's a problem, and it will definitely decrease the amount of eggs you get out of the whole process. And you can buy those little fake eggs at the store to put in there to try to trick them so they learn to, they're not going to get anything out of pecking at that egg. It can work, but you still have to be really diligent in getting the real eggs out of there readily so that they don't get the opportunity to go and peck the actual egg and break it open so they get their reward is what they're thinking. So you want to really try to prevent that. And usually I think with our regulations, you shouldn't, if you make your coop to the right size, you shouldn't have issues in terms of that going on because oftentimes that results from overcrowding and not having enough nesting boxes and things like that. Anything else? Or anything else? No, try to stay pretty basic. I will go and get those cards so we actually have that hotline number. But there's some good handouts that go into more detail on what I think the main points were, which is that biosecurity or that cleanliness and prevention, just your general daily care, and then how to handle the eggs. Those are really important. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. You guys are an easy crowd. Do a lot of you have chickens already, or anybody? First-timers? Anybody still on the fence with whether they want to do it or not? Yep. Perfect. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a break and let Lisa get everything set up. Again, these guys are happy to look up your jurisdiction and where you live if you want to do that to clarify whether you're in a C or unincorporated. And we didn't want to print out other jurisdictions' regulations just in case what we found on the Internet was not up to date or as readily available, but if you aren't sure, we can definitely look up, and these guys are Google experts. So just go ahead, and bathrooms are right there, water, and all the materials over there, and these guys are open for questions if you have any for the county, and we will get back at it, and let's do 10 minutes.
We don't have copies of it. What I did do, though, is I have it uploaded to the live video feed that's online, so I can send you an email to it, or no, they didn't have that ready. So we don't have copies of them. Yeah, you can do that too. Would you rather have that or a paper copy? We can do that right now too. This is right over there. Yep.
Here are those cards with that hotline number on it. I'm just looking at if you don't want to drive me backwards and like issues, and you have to decide whether it's nasty or if it's spoiled and then you get a disease or or E. coli and salmonella, all that good stuff. That's why lots of people that those same things probably also so yeah, so you eat all the bugs and everything. Actually, I didn't notice that when we get a bird, get fewer bugs in our backyard because they that's on the board and something. But yeah, so that's just one. I want to invite you to or anything like that with your birds and bring other critters in that outside. Those are the three main reasons. Not to just go hard about it. Yeah, eating them outside, and then like I said, it's great for the tree. It's just like eating them with scratch.
And they relocate for babies.
Exactly. That's kind of right. So like that's what you would do. You can't go and you can right. Yeah. That one that I made was meant to be a tractor that you can move around, but it didn't like have this box on the side. It was just a triangle. The way it was designed actually was to be able to take it out and drag it, which is fine. But then I pulled that resting box off the side and made it too heavy.
Yeah, they listen to me. We've been talking about stuff at work and a whole lot of times we get it out of what you were just talking about. Wait. That's last year.
No, you don't have to. Yeah, I do that. That's
This guy cut a bluegill and a drain. Wow.
Like we had 4 birds, so we'll eat a ton of eggs. Yeah, 4 birds. And then we think of a breed of bird, something late, heavier than others. So some birds will breed 5 eggs a week, and other birds will need 3. Think of a breed. And so, that would be one thing. But we have a mix of birds. Single water animals, average 3-4 a week. And for me, my wife, my teenage daughter, and my younger daughter spent time with we have
You're cool with that? Yep.
because we were going
Oh, but a minimum of 2 just for...
they're social. Yeah. And if you get 3, they can team up. Like 2 of them will buddy up and not like the other one.
Okay.
And so they'll pick on the odd man out.
Okay.
So.
Good to know.
Can everybody hear me over the mic? Hello? Okay, there we go, we're good. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Lisa Mason, and I am the horticulture agent for Arapahoe County. I want to do an informal survey. I'm going to talk about bees tonight. Who already has beehives? Okay, a few of you. And who is looking to have beehives? Wow, that's awesome. Okay, and who feels like they know a lot about beekeeping and is ready to roll? Okay. Okay, well, yeah, I know you guys are. Well, beekeeping is a huge field, and I've got a half hour. So tonight I'm going to talk about pollinators and bees, kind of big picture, and that to help inform you on whether or not you want to be a beekeeper. But first I want to talk about Colorado State University Extension. Who's familiar with CSU Extension? Okay, not too many people. Okay, so we are part of Colorado State University, and we are essentially the outreach branch. So it is our job to bring the best scientific-based research and bring it to the community. And that's one reason tonight why we're doing this workshop. The new ordinance passed in Arapahoe County, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about chicken keeping and beekeeping, and so we want to provide you with the best possible information. All right, well, I'm starting big picture here. Why do we care about insects? Well, for starters, we can't live without them. Insects provide us with many benefits, and particularly pollinators provide us with our food supply. And that's just one reason. There's a lot of different reasons, which is a whole other presentation. But insects, including bees and other pollinators, are declining. They're declining for a lot of different reasons. Habitat loss, climate change, the spread of invasive species. For pollinators, pesticide use and diseases are all major issues. And so, why does that matter? Well, about 1/3 of our crops the most nutritious part of our diet, our vegetables, our fruits, and nuts, depend on pollinators. That's how the plants reproduce. And so that's 1 in every 3 bites of food. And like I said, it's the most nutritious part of our diet, too. Bees pollinate about $15 billion worth of crops each year. And that equates to about over 80 crops are dependent on pollinating insects. And it's not just our fruits and veggies. It is our meat and our dairy industries, because bees pollinate alfalfa and clover, and cattle feed on alfalfa and clover. And in addition to humans needing pollinators, our ecosystems also need pollinators. About 70% of the world's plants require animal pollination. And so what exactly is a pollinator? What happens in this process? So the bees, they don't know they're actually pollinating. They're just visiting the flowers for pollen and nectar rewards. The pollen provides protein for young bees, and the nectar provides energy for bees. And so they're going to the flowers. The flowers and bees have co-evolved together, so oftentimes the flowers are marked saying, come, bees, come to my flower, because there's going to be nectar and pollen rewards. And so when the bee goes to that flower, the pollen grains are deposited on the bee's hairs, and then when the bee goes to another flower, those pollen grains are then transferred to that flower, and that essentially is how the plants reproduce. And we have a lot of different pollinators out there. Tonight we're focused on bees, but I do want to give, kind of a shout out to all the other pollinators we have, and most of these pollinators are also struggling too. And so pollinator conservation is critical. All right, but before we dive into honeybees, did you guys know we have over 20,000 bees worldwide? 4,000 species in North America, and over 900 species in Colorado. The honeybee is one of those species. And so we have this huge amount of bee diversity here in Colorado. And so when we think about pollinator conservation, we want to think about all the bees. And so I want to talk about the life cycles of bees really quick, because that puts into context on how we can better protect them. We have eusocial bees. This is our honeybee. Of all the bee species worldwide, this compromises, I don't know why my slides are moving forward without me. This compromises about 10% of our bee populations. And so honeybees and other social bees have 3 characteristics in common. They have overlapping generations. They have the reproductive division of labor, meaning the queen bee is the one that lays the egg. And, every bee in that colony has a specific job. And cooperative brood care. There are actually some bees that their job is to care for the young and growing bees. Social bees, they have a queen, they have worker bees, and they have drones. The drones are the males, and they don't have much of a job except for other than mating. And then the worker bees, some of them could be foragers, some could be, caring for the new bees. They have a variety of different jobs, and a lot of that's dependent on the age of the bee. Then we have solitary bees. So the other 90% of our bees in the world are solitary bees. Now the life cycle is very different for these bees. We have the adult bee. The female, she forages from flower to flower, collecting pollen and nectar. She will find a hole, a nest site, usually underground or in a cavity, and she will pack that pollen and nectar into a tight little ball, and that's called bee bread. She will deposit 1 egg on that bee bread, and she will seal up her nest cell. And she'll do that several times. Depending on the species, depends on the number of eggs she might lay. And so that young larva, that egg, has all the food it needs to grow into an adult bee. So she lays her eggs, the larva will hatch, they overwinter underground or in a cavity, and then the following summer, that adult bee will emerge and the cycle will repeat itself. So we have social bees and we have solitary bees, and then we have this, real quick, one more thing about solitary bees. 90% of our bees are solitary. Of all the solitary bees, 70% of those live underground, and 30% of those live in cavities. A cavity could be a bee hotel. A cavity could be an old, in a dead tree, some old beetle tunnels. Any place, nook or cranny, the bees
that's usually about 6 inches long, bees can live there. Some bees will actually excavate the inside of twigs. And that's what you're seeing here. So you've got the bee bread, and then the larva on the bee bread, and then a pupa, which is a bee in the middle of metamorphosis that's about to become an adult bee. So we've got social bees, we've got solitary bees, and then we have primitively eusocial, which is a group of bees that share characteristics of both solitary and social bees. Most commonly, these are our bumblebees. So bumblebees have a queen, and they have a colony every year, but they live underground as well. So the queen bee, a brand new queen, she just hatched, she will go on a mating flight, and she'll mate. She will collect some pollen and nectar, and then she goes to hibernate over the winter, and she'll hibernate all winter long until early spring. She'll emerge, and she'll fly around, foraging for pollen and nectar, and then goes back to her nest and lays eggs. She'll have several generations in a summer, and towards the end of the summer, she'll start laying male eggs and new queens. When those eggs hatch, they go fly and do their thing, and the new queens will mate, and the cycle will repeat. So we have a lot of different bees here when we think about bee conservation and how we can best help the bees. All right, and we know the bees are struggling, like I mentioned. So what can we do? Well, one thing is beekeeping. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about pollinator habitat as well, because that's another great thing that we can do to help our bees. So there are a lot of pros to beekeeping. The biggest one is probably honey. It takes 12 bees her entire life to make 1 teaspoon of honey. So next time you put, a little bit of honey in your tea or your coffee, think about how hard those bees worked. Honey can be a great gift. It can be a great thing. There's a lot of nutritional benefits. If you're interested in selling the honey, there's a law that you have to be trained in cottage food safety. You can do this one of 2 ways. I have some flyers in the back. You can take a class online, or you can take a class through Colorado State University Extension. The other agent in our office, she actually puts on these classes. And the classes that she hosts specifically talk about honey. So it's a great class. There's flyers on the table. Let me know if you have any questions about that. But honey is a great perk of beekeeping. Beeswax. You can collect beeswax. You can make candles and a lot of other beauty products out of it. Bees provide pollination services. So if you have a hive and you've got vegetables, you've got flowers, they're going to help pollinate all your flowers. But keep in mind, you have a lot of native bees in the area too. So it'll be a combination of both. And then beekeeping can be a rewarding experience. It is absolutely fascinating to open up the hive and find the queen and look at the new baby bees. And it's a great educational opportunity for kids as well. And because they're the ones that are going to be caring for our environment in the future. So it's a great way to teach people. Some considerations to keep in mind if you're considering to start beekeeping. It is a time commitment. It's probably about 1 hour a week, and then sometimes more depending on the type of season if you're harvesting honey. And I'm looking at Deb and and Jill over there. Would you say that's accurate? Well,
we spend a lot more than that.
Okay, but you guys also have a lot of hives though too, correct? Yes, yeah. So it depends on, and we recommend starting small as well too. Don't go all in and keep the regulations in mind too. Caitlin mentioned before, know the regulations on where you live. So if you live in unincorporated Arapahoe County, you might be under an HOA that has different regulations. So very important to keep in mind. Keep in mind the cost of supplies. It can be several $100s to get started. You've got to purchase the hive box. You've got to purchase all the equipment, personal protective. You need a veil, that kind of thing, and then of course the bees itself. There is always a chance of stings. I'm going to talk a little bit more about stings in a little bit, but if you know you're allergic or anything, that's really important to keep in mind. And then beekeeping can be challenging. We have a lot of pests and diseases that we have to worry about. The weather, Colorado weather, is very challenging because we have extreme temperature fluctuations, and the bees don't always have time to adjust that quickly. And so we can have hive losses over the winter. That's pretty common. So it's important to really do your research so you can do your best possible job at keeping those bees alive. All right, so some other things to keep in mind. Sort of some best practices for beekeeping. Be a good neighbor. Be very transparent about the communication with your neighbor. Even if they're, whether they're pro or against beekeeping, that's critical because that can inform if they're going to have a party, for example. You don't want to be getting in your hive at that time because that could increase the chance of bees getting irritated or anything. Give them some honey. That's always a good way to soothe those neighbors that might have issues. And then, there's always, if your neighbors are spraying pesticides or anything like that, it's good to just have that transparent communication. Educate your neighbors in your communities. If you're a beekeeper, you're an ambassador for honeybees and all bees, and it's a great opportunity to teach others about what you're doing. Provide a water source. So this isn't in the regulations, but it's very critical. You want to have some sort of water source near the hive because otherwise your bees could end up in your neighbor's bird bath, hot tub, or whatever water source is close by. Bees need water just like every other creature. And then another thing you want to do is store the equipment in a sealed container. You can't just leave your hive tools and your equipment out because that will attract other bees, that could attract other nuisance pests, and that's a good way to spread diseases between bees. So always have your equipment in a sealed container. Conducting Varroa mite checks. Varroa mites are little tiny mites. They're very mobile, and they easily transfer from bees to bee and from hive to hive. So during the season, you'll want to do Varroa mite checks about once a month. And this is critical because if you're over the threshold, then you'll have to do some sort of treatments for your hive. And by not doing any treatments, you run the risk of those mites spreading to your neighbor's hives or, even further than that. We highly recommend joining a local beekeeping club or working with other beekeepers. This is a great way to learn, and it's also a great way to learn about the hardships and the lessons learned and can save you both time and money. And then, of course, doing your research and asking questions is really important. All right, so I'm going to go through a series of questions that I get a lot about bees. Bee swarming. What do I do if the bees swarm? Well, that can be a very fearful thing for people, especially if they're not familiar with what's happening. Bees swarm when they outgrow their hive. So they eat as much as possible before they go, and they leave to go. The queen and her bees, they will take off and to find another nest site. Now, during this process, it's important to note that they're generally a little more docile at this time because they're very full, they're not hungry, and also they don't have a nest to protect right now. They don't have a hive to protect, so they're out searching for a new home. So they're actually very vulnerable in this stage. And beekeepers, generally, they don't want their hive to swarm because, that's half their bees, first of all, but also that can weaken the hive, so they're less likely to have as much honey, and the bees will likely have a harder time surviving through the winter. So there are things beekeepers can do to prevent hives from swarming, but if you come across a swarm, which is this time of year, the best thing you can do is call the swarm hotline. Or if you have the local beekeeping number, you can also call them as well. And they will actually come get the hive, and there's a waiting list for beekeepers to collect a swarm. Because, those are free bees. So stings. We get this question about what about bee stings? And if my neighbor has a beehive, am I going to get stung all the time? Likely no. So it's important to know the difference between a bee and a wasp. And most of the time when people say, oh, I was stung by a bee, 90% of the time they were stung by a yellow jacket. And so 90% of all stings in Colorado are actually from yellow jackets. So you know those wasps that are swarming around your picnic or your barbecue? Those are all the time going to be yellow jackets. They are a native insect, but they are very aggressive, and they're scavengers. So they're out looking, and they can smell, and they're the ones that are more likely to sting. One thing you can do is you can put out the yellow traps out there. If you have a yellow jacket problem, the best time to do that is actually in the spring, because yellow jackets are a social wasp, so they also have a queen. And so if you get some of those queens, you're less likely to have a full colony develop. Note, though, that yellow jackets actually live underground. So their nests are very difficult to find. So it's not something where you can go find their nest usually and spray it or anything like that. The other type of wasp that bees are often confused with is the European paper wasp. This is a non-native insect, and this is the one that you see building the paper nest cells on the side of your house or, underneath your roof. These wasps are not nearly as aggressive as yellow jackets. So they might look scary, but they actually are not as aggressive, unless you are threatening their nest, and then they will become aggressive. They are not attracted to the yellow wasp traps. So if you have them building nests in your shed, for example, and you hang up one of those yellow wasp traps, it's not going to work. The yellow wasp traps only attract yellow jackets. So if you do have a European paper wasp problem, if it's too close to your house and it's a human safety issue, the best thing you can do is usually spray. And you want to do that at night. You want to be very, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but pesticides, the label is the law. You have to follow those instructions explicitly. And so for wasps, you'd want to do that at night when all the other insects are in their homes and they are not out flying around. Any questions on stings? If you do get stung by a bee, so wasps can sting over and over. A bee can only sting you once. And after that bee dies. So a bee, they don't really want to sting you. That is their last resort to protect their colony. So if you do get stung, you want to remove the stinger. A credit card is usually the best way to do that. And then you want to walk away calmly from that hive. Because what happens is once you're stung, there's a pheromone that's emitted, and that could potentially attract other bees. So just stay calm, walk away, take some Benadryl. If you know you have an allergic reaction, carry an EpiPen and call your doctor. All right, can I just set up a hive and let it be? Unfortunately, you cannot. Hives require ongoing maintenance. This is not something you can just let it be. And a good way to think about it is the honeybee is a domesticated insect. We actually brought the honeybee over from Europe in the 1600s. And since then, we have bred honeybees, and it's become a very domesticated insect. So just like any other domestic animal, it requires ongoing care. Ongoing care is going to help your hive be much stronger and healthier. You're going to get more honey from it. You're going to have a much better experience, and you're going to limit the spread of pests and diseases. And that's critical. There are some scary honeybee diseases out there that we don't currently have in Colorado, but we could. And we want to practice, healthy hive management as best we can, so we don't spread diseases. So pesticides, this always comes up. Should we be banning pesticides, or what do we do about this? Well, at Extension, we want to provide the pros and cons to all situations, and we want to have we're the unbiased perspective. And so what we recommend, we know pesticides do kill bees, so if someone chooses to spray pesticides, they need to do it very responsibly. And the first thing they need to do is read the label. So when you buy a pesticide product, you are essentially signing a contract under federal law that you will apply that product appropriately. So hiring pesticide applicators is another great thing to do because they know how to apply pesticides. So if someone chooses to use pesticides, being responsible is absolutely critical. Communicate with your neighbors. Ask them if they're applying pesticides and if they could let you know when, so you could take the necessary precautions to protect your bees. And then teach your neighbors about, I have a beehive, this is critical here. Another thing you can do, there is a website called driftwatch.org. This is a voluntary website where you sign up and you say, I have 6 hives on my property. And so any farms or crops nearby, if they're spraying pesticides, they will tell you when they're spraying pesticides, so you have the opportunity to protect your bees. All right, so is beekeeping the best way to save the bees? Well, if done properly, beekeeping can be a fantastic resource. You're improving pollination in the area. You're providing education. You are helping the bees. But if the responsibility, if the time, if the maintenance isn't quite for you, consider planting more pollinator-friendly flowers and building pollinator habitats, because that is going to help support our native bees, which are just as important as our honeybees. And I want to give you an example of that. Honeybees are a generalist pollinator. They pollinate a lot of different crops, but there are some crops that they are unable to pollinate. And an example of that are tomatoes, peppers, and blueberries. Those can only be pollinated by bumblebees and other specialized bees. And that's because bumblebees, they give off a specific vibration. And, the pollen in tomato flowers is really stuck in there. So the specific vibration of that bumblebee releases the pollen from the tomato plants. So a tuning fork could do the same thing. A tuning fork can actually give off the same vibrations as a bumblebee. But why would you want to, hand pollinate that when we have bumblebees to do that? So another good example of a specialist pollinator are squash and pumpkin plants. They have to be pollinated by squash bees. Very specific genera of bee. If you go out in the early morning and look in the big yellow flowers, you'll see some bees sleeping in there. And then you plant them and they will come. So we want to keep all bees in mind when we think about pollinator conservation. So beekeeping isn't for you. I'm going to talk a little bit more about pollinator habitats. I always get the question, too, about are honeybees outcompeting native bees? Well, there's some research that is supporting, yes, honeybees are actually outcompeting our native bees, but there's not a solid conclusive answer on that either. And, backyard beekeeping is a big thing, and one individual having a hive or two is not likely to disrupt all the native bees. So the best thing you can do, though, if you have honeybees and you want to support the native bees, is building pollinator habitat. So what do bees need to live in our area? And this goes if you're a beekeeper or not. So they need food. They need a diversity of flowers, because different flowers offer different nutrients. So just like the human diet, diversity is key. They need flowers all season long. So from the early spring when the honeybees are just emerging to fall, when the rabbit brush is blooming. Not just bees, lots of insects use rabbit brush for nectar sources. You want to avoid double blooms. Does anyone know what a double bloom flower is? Double flower is? Okay, an example is that bright pink flower in the corner. So horticulturalists have actually bred flowers so that the flowers do not have the plant's reproductive parts in them. They're basically modified to make additional petals. And so what you get is a plant that, without the reproductive parts, the plant it's basically sterile. It doesn't have any pollen or nectar resources. Now, this is done because, look at how pretty that flower is, right? They're beautiful flowers, and also they're less maintenance, because after a bee pollinates a flower, that flower is done. It will die, and that can create more maintenance throughout the season. So the intentions were good, but they don't offer any rewards for bees or other pollinators. So the best thing you can do when you're at the garden store, look for yourself in all those flowers and look for the plant reproductive parts. And if it's an outside garden nursery, look for bees. Look and see what bees are on those flowers, and that'll tell you if it's a good plant to get. And then another question I get is it better to plant natives or, our horticultural varieties just as good. We know natives are awesome for bees and other pollinators. That's what they've been doing for a lot of years. Horticultural varieties also may offer similar benefits, but again, there's not one conclusive answer. So the best thing to do is go to the nursery and look for yourself and see what the bees are pollinating. We do have some recommendations on plant lists and some of the handouts that you have, and there's a lot of great resources online as well. Shelter. So like I said, honeybees live in man-made hives. Native bees live underground or in cavities. And so all those ground nesting bees, they just need bare soil. You don't need to amend it. You don't need to do anything to it except for leave space for bare soil. And, oftentimes we mulch or have turf grass, but you can be very intentional about it and create a very aesthetically pleasing landscape while having areas of bare soil. Reducing mulching is also important. Mulch is fantastic for the landscape, but if it's too deep, the bees are likely to not nest there. So having only an inch or two of mulch might work, or again, just leave areas of bare soil. Leaving dead flower stems throughout the winter. So for those stem nesting bees, they'll nest in some of the perennials. Raspberry is good, elderberry, spotted Joe pieweed, and I have a list if you're interested. Those are the ones I can think of right now. Those hollow stems are perfect bee nesting habitat. So instead of whacking them all down in the fall, leave them there over winter and cut them, after it gets warmer right before you start planting, or right when you've seen the bees that have emerged. Reducing lawn area. So to a bee, a green grassy lawn is like a parking lot. It offers no benefits to them. So lawns, turf grass it's great for us to enjoy for parks, for sports fields. It has its benefits. But if it's just turf and it's not really doing anything, consider tearing some of that out and putting in some flowers, offering up some resources for the bees. And I love the term wildscaping. You can have a perfectly beautiful manicured lawn, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just all green grass either. It can look a little bit more wild, which is likely what the bees and other pollinators and other insects will go for. And then, just like everybody else, water. Bees need water. So you can get shallow dishes and put some rocks in it and fill it up like you would your bird bath, and the bees can land on those rocks and drink the water. And again, that's for honeybees and native bees. All right, bee houses are the up-and-coming thing. You can find them almost anywhere. And the more I learn about these, the more I would caution, do your research. These are very specific. So here's some general recommendations. The one that's not on here is the tunnels need to be at least 6 inches long. So you'll find a lot on the market that, it's only 2 or 3 inches deep. Look for the ones that are at least 6 inches long. They need to be protected from the elements, and that includes having a roof to protect from the rain and the other elements from getting in the bee nest. Usually southeast facing is a good rule of thumb, and 4 or 5 feet up from the ground. Mount it very firmly. If you hang it from a tree and it's real wobbly, the bees are less likely to use it. And, of course, make sure there are flowers nearby. There's a variety of nesting materials you can use. There's a whole bunch of tutorials online, too. Make sure you're not using plastic or any other material that can't release moisture. Wood, the moisture will evaporate from. If you use plastic or anything, mildew and fungus and other stuff can grow in there, and that'll be bad for the bees. And then you also want to make sure you're cleaning them out also, and that will prevent the spread of diseases between native bees. Okay, so I just barely scratched the surface. There's a lot of resources out there if you're interested in whether it's beekeeping and or native bees. We recommend, we have a variety of CSU fact sheets online. The Colorado Beekeepers Association is a great place, and you can also find, depending on where you live, your local beekeeping club. The screenshot of that says the Honeybee Health Coalition, that's a great place to get started to do research on managing a hive. And then talk to fellow beekeepers in your fellow beekeeping clubs. And since we're on that topic, we have Debbie and Joe here. They're from the Southeast Beekeeping Club, and they are a fantastic resource. I would highly recommend getting to know them while you're here. Do you want to talk a couple minutes?
So I'm Debbie Comparada.
You got to talk at the mic because we're live. We're live. You can watch this online. Oh, great. We should have had Joe do this.
Okay, so I'm Debbie Comparada. I'm a beekeeper. My husband also is a beekeeper. And we have about 35 hives at this time. So we started off thinking it was going to be kind of like you, maybe 1 or 2 hives. We started the first year 4 hives because we kind of swarmed that year. And then the next year it ended up to be 8 hives, and then it just kind of grew. Okay, so one of the things is you do need to take some classes. Okay, there's classes at Hudson Gardens, go to Be or Not to Be. There's other places, a lot of places that you can take classes, and I do recommend you take classes. You can get a lot of information off the internet, and it's great, but sometimes it's not the best information. Okay. The other thing that you can do is I do recommend that you join a bee club. I have some information here about the local bee clubs. All of them are listed on this page, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have this local one. But we have the Southeast Beekeeping Club that meets in Parker, and it's the first Wednesday of the month. Okay. And great resource. Come join us. You know, we have great eats. Get to know the other people. You kind of raise your hand and say where you're from, and somebody else says, oh, I live in that area, okay? And so that's how you get to know your neighbors. So I can pass it out. Also, I just wanted to mention that the Arapahoe County is going to have the Arapahoe County Fair, okay, and that comes up in July the 25th to the 28th, okay? So I'm going to be out there representing 17 Mile House, but representing bees. So come out there and look at all the stuff. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Joe is doing extraction of, you know, some of this stuff that we've got. Here we're going to have some honey, and we're going to extract that on Saturday and also Sunday. So, but I think the Brighton Bee Club is going to be out there representing them, and there's a lot of things, a lot of activities for the kids that I have set up for that. So definitely go to the Arapahoe County Fair. But if you guys have any questions, I can pass these out, or I can put them over here, and if you're interested, then you can pick one up.
Okay, a couple more quick things. I also want to mention, is anyone dealing with Japanese beetles? Yes. Okay, so Japanese beetles and bees is a huge issue. There are products out there that you can use that will not hurt the bees. And we want to make sure, tell your neighbors, tell everybody that if you have bees on the same flowers as the Japanese beetles, you cannot spray pesticides on them. So, but there are a couple of safe products out there. We have a great fact sheet on the CSU website. We're going to be teaching some classes, too, on how to manage Japanese beetles. But just another issue to, if you have a hive and your neighbor has Japanese beetles, something to keep in mind. And we can talk more about that, too, if you guys are interested. I want to wrap up and thank you guys for coming. We are CSU Extension. Some of the services our horticulture department offers are diagnostic services. So if you've got a sick tree, sick plants, your lawn is dying, something's going on, you've got a weird insect that you don't know what it is, you can call, email us, walk in, send us pictures, and we will help figure out what is going on. We can also do on-site consultations for lawns and trees. So if your lawn really is dying and you want to have us come out, it's $75 for 1 hour. And again, we provide that unbiased perspective on what could be going on with your landscape. And then we do a lot of public programs and presentations. There's a little flyer on the back of our upcoming events. So let us know how we can help you. Here's our contact information. We are open from 8 to 4:30 every day, so you can bring in a sample or email us or call us. And And then I want to give a shout out to the Master Gardener program too. We have Master Gardeners in our communities at the local garden centers. They're giving presentations, and they staff a help desk during the season on 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So when you call, someone is there to help. If you're interested in becoming a Master Gardener, we have a great training program. You get, knowledge straight from Colorado State University experts and get a chance to do a lot of cool things. Debbie beat me to it. The Arapahoe County Fair is coming up. So in addition to all the great beekeeping education that's going to be going on, we also have horticulture and floriculture competitions. So you can enter your prized vegetable, your prized flowers, and a lot of other great things too. So come join us. And are there any questions? None. Wow. Okay. Well, come talk to me afterwards, and thank you all again for coming.
Alrighty, awesome. Thank you again, Lisa and Jonathan. We definitely couldn't do it without them. They're the experts. We just draft the regulations and enforce them. Does anybody have any questions for zoning or animal control while you're here? Perfect. Well, all of us are going to hang out for a little bit, so if you kind of want to look at some of the stuff that's back there, get some more. We printed out the beekeeping presentations, so they're back there as well. And then we did print out some extra of the chicken keeping ones. So feel free to take a few if you need for somebody at home, or if you didn't get one, feel free to grab on your way out. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Thank you, everybody, again.